Hi all again. We're going to start looking at some scripting in this video. Now, in order to do this, we're going to be using ActionScript 3.0. It's quite similar to using JavaScript if you've ever used that. One thing you also need to bear in mind with when you start to do some scripting is that things are more likely to go wrong. One of the nice things about Animate and Flash is that there are lots of things to help you out with this. Using scripting will make your animation potentially far more interactive and far more powerful than otherwise. However, it does have its downsides. For example, you wouldn't really want to use script like this, even though it's similar to JavaScript. If you're going to make things like e-commerce websites, there are still security breaches out there, and it's just not something that you want to do. Now, the earlier tutorial I showed you use HTML5 canvas. For this one, I'm going to use ActionScript 3.0 because I've found this to be more responsive in terms of being able to use the ActionScript more efficiently. I've run into issues when I've tried to do it using HTML5, and for this example, it will do exactly what we need it to do. So we're going to use that method. Now, obviously, in the future, you will want to use HTML5, but like I said, for this instance, it will be fine. And if you did want to go over to HTML5, the code will be very similar, if not identical. Now, so I'm just going to start with ActionScript 3.0. It looks exactly the same as what you used previously, and you've got all of the usual tools and so on. Now, all I'm going to do is create a little animation going across the screen, and then I'm going to create a button. Now, the buttons are really, really easy to do, fortunately, as is the animation, and so therefore the effect that we want to achieve should be relatively simple. Obviously, I'm going to use something that is relatively straightforward, which you could potentially put into your animation. However, it may not be exactly what you need. It may be something that you would need to adapt in the future for your own needs, because obviously I'm just kind of showing you as an example of the types of things that you can do. I'm sure you can use your imagination in terms of making it do exactly what you need it to do. Now, I'm going to start off by loading in my troll face like I used earlier, because we all love a troll face, and I've also got a smiley face in here that I'm also going to use. So I'm just going to load them in to my library, and what we're going to do here is I'm just going to make this say 60 frames long. I'm going to call this layer my troll face layer, because this is the one where I want it to animate and cycle through. And first thing I'm going to do is set up the animation, and I'm just going to drag out my troll face, and remember it's quite big. So I want to, oops, wrong button. I want to use the free transform, just make it a wee bit smaller, and then I'm going to create a motion tween. It's going to say I need to convert it to a symbol, and then at the end I can just drag it over here. This is literally just a test, just to show you the types of things that we can do. So if I was to test this, it will literally just go around on a loop. Now, you notice it does preview it in a shockwave player, and it's just going to go around and round and round and round and round, which is pretty horrendous. So what you are going to try and do here is add a button, and I'm going to call it Vanish. And it's just going to be the most simple button that you can ever imagine. Just going to be using a rectangle, just going to drag it out, and then I'm going to write on it using the text tool. It will be clearer when I move it onto the black background, because it's obviously white text, and I've spelt it wrong. That's a good effort. There we go. So what you can do if you actually, because if you start moving this, you'll notice that the background will go and the text won't. You can actually highlight everything and group them all together by doing Control G, and now it will go everywhere I want it to. So I've made a button. I've just put some silly text on it, make it go away. However, see, if I run this test, it's not actually going to do anything because it'll actually appear to be a graphic. I've not actually made it into a button yet. To make it into a button, I'm just going to right click and do convert to symbol, which is what you would need it to have done anyway. Now it will give you some very different options, such as movie clips, or is it a graphic, or is it, what is it going to be? I'm just going to call this vanish, and I'm going to put btn at the end. Would help if I could spell, so that I know that in the future it's a button, because I'm sure you can appreciate that in bigger files there may be many hundreds of library elements here, and you want to know exactly what they are. And if you wanted to, you could double click on here, and then you have different options for these mouse states. So up is the standard mouse state, over is if your mouse is over the button, down is if you are holding it down, and hit is once you've actually clicked it. Now I'm not too fussed about that right now, so I want to make it go back to the main timeline. And I'm just going to go back and call this, because if you go into properties, you see that you need to give your button an instant name. I'm going to call it vanish. And by the way, with the text, I just realized that I didn't actually mention how to change the text for you. It's literally a case of making sure you have the properties open rather than the library. Okay, and then you have all your usual kind of text options down here. Now, I see this is quite nice. We haven't actually done anything with it yet, but if I did run it again, you can see it now kind of registers it as a button. So you've got the hand symbol on there now, but it's not doing anything yet. Now, I do actually want it to go somewhere. So I'm just going to make a new layer. I'm going to put a keyframe right at the end, and the keyframe is going to be blank, because you notice it goes beyond all the other frames here. So this is on frame 61. And this is, like I said, right at the end, and it's purposely blank. And I'm going to drag out my smiley face. You know, it's not really me when it's a smiley face. Anyone that knows me knows I'm a bit grumpy. And I'm just going to put some text on there, and it's gone with lots of exclamation marks. I'm also going to give this a name, so you make sure you click the keyframe, like I almost didn't do there, and then I'm able to give this frame a name, and I'm just going to call this frame vanish. Now the reason why we give these things names is the actual timeline here is quite small. You've got 60 frames, it goes on for about 2.5 seconds, it's not very long. However, I'm sure you can appreciate that for longer animations they may go on for potentially many minutes or hours. So you may well want to actually name your main frames so that you can link to them whenever you want. I'm also going to go to frame 1, and I'm going to call this one home, for the same reason that when I come to do my scripting, which is imminent, I'll be able to refer to it easily. Now, one thing I do want is I don't want it to do what it's going to do and literally go straight through and include this frame. So when I test it, you'll notice that it will go to that frame at the end, which is not what I want. There we go, you can see it flick through there. I want it just to display the troll face over and over and over and over, which will drive some people crazy. But now, it doesn't really matter what frame I used here, but I'm just going to click on the one in the middle. I'll call it layer 3. I probably should call it something more relevant, but I haven't as yet. And I have a tab here called Actions. If you haven't got your actions available to you, you can open up here from halfway down the window option, or you can right click and there's an actions option here, but mine is already open. And when you do this, you're going to want to make sure that you have the frame selected. Now actually my frame is the incorrect one here, so you can see it's called layer 3 : 1. However, I don't want frame 1, I want this frame. So I'm just going to convert it into a keyframe. And then when I go to it, that's better. See, it says layer 3 : 60. So this is going to be frame 60 in layer 3. And all I'm going to tell it to do is to go back to frame 1 and play. So I'm just going to use some very simple code, which is goto and play. And then I'm going to put in home, because that's what I called it just a few minutes ago. And then a semicolon at the end. And this should make it loop infinitely with the troll face. This is where it doesn't work. No, there we are. You see it's just going to loop around with the troll face, trolling people merrily. And this isn't where I now want the button to take me to the smiley face. So slightly more complex code for this. I'm going to click on the button layer, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm not going to lie. First of all, to show you guys that this thing exists, so it makes your life easier, really. In Flash or Animate, you have the option here to use code snippets. Now these perform common actions within Flash or Animate, and they're really kind of very simple to use, really. So when you open it up, you have this little dialog box. You're using ActionScript, and you can see you've got all these different options that you can use. Now we're using a timeline navigation because we're going to a certain frame, okay? But you might use other options, such as you might want to point to a web page. So for example, you can set this button when the user clicks on the button, the web browser will take them to wherever they set the web page to. Or you may want to play a movie clip or whatever it might be. However, in this option, we are going to a frame and stopping. So we're going to the frame we made called vanish, and we're stopping at that point. And all I need to do is double click, and it adds it to me. Adds it for me, which is great. Now what I do have to do is actually make a couple of, well, I'll say one modification, which is where it actually says go to and stop, and then in brackets 5. So currently it would go to frame 5, which is actually not what we want. We want it to go to the frame that we called vanish. So I just needed to add that in there. Remember to add these speech marks around it. And that's it in terms of that code. And actually, as a bit of code goes, this is a really straightforward bit. I know there's a couple of quite long names on there, but actually if you were making it from scratch, you probably wouldn't call it that. However, it's quite nice that Flash and Animate will actually add it in there for us. So now when I run the code, when I run the movie scene, when I click on it, it takes me to that page. Now obviously this is quite powerful, because if you think of this potentially as a web page, or as something that users can navigate through, the ability to go to various different points on the timeline at will means that you can have lots of different sections within your animation. It means you can have lots of different sections within a web page, or I know people use this for things like testing programs. If they have like an interactive quiz, they can quite easily add things to it. It really becomes quite powerful quite quickly. And in terms of what you need to do for the level 2 or 3, the specification says use a script. So ultimately, something like this would be more than sufficient for you to be able to meet that criteria, because you're letting users have far more interactivity. You're making the animation much more powerful. You can do much more with it. Even though this particular example is obviously quite basic, I'm sure you can see that you can do quite a lot with this quite quickly. Well, hopefully that has been helpful to you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.